Hello, everyone, and welcome to the World Women Future Forum 2020. My name is Lawley Head. I'm the founder of Lawley Head Media, a content marketing and digital strategy company in Frisco, Texas. And I am just so delighted to be here with you today. We had all hoped that we could have the forum in a face-to-face environment, but we are pivoting the best we can. One of the things that the World Women Foundation's events are really known for are the great networking opportunities and just the interaction that you have with the other attendees as well as the speakers and participants. So I would encourage you as we go throughout this session as well as the rest of the forum to really reach out and interact using the hashtags that are here on the screen as well as tagging at World Women Fund in all of your posts so that we can really try to recreate that connectivity in a digital format. One of my true passions is storytelling and specifically helping to take life-changing messages and stories from people out into the world where they can just really expand and take hold. And we certainly are going to get to do that here today. I am joined by two dynamic women for our session, which is sponsored by our headline partner, Deloitte. And I'd like to just introduce you to my guests next. First, we have Peggy Wallace, who is a well-known early-stage investor in women-owned companies. She's joining us today from New York, where she is the managing partner of Golden Seeds, which has invested $120 million in more than 150 companies that then have gone on to raise an incredible more than $1 billion. It's one of the nation's largest angel networks with more than 300 members today. So welcome, Peggy. I'm so glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
And our second panelist for this session is Shaloo Garg, who's a champion for the concept of technology for good. She's joining us from Silicon Valley, where she's the managing director of Microsoft for Startups. And previously, she was partner global Oracle innovation at Oracle. And she was also a part of the mergers and acquisitions team that did the acquisitions for PeopleSoft and Siebel, among others. So welcome to you as well, Shaloo.
Thank you, Lauren. Great to be here.
Before we dig into today's topic, I thought we could start by letting the audience get to know each of you a little bit personally and share how you came to be involved in the work that you're doing right now. Shaloo, I wondered if I could ask you to start and share the story that you shared with me the other day about your experience in 6th grade.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Firstly, I wanted to thank World Women Future Forum for having me here. And of course, the awesome crew with me, Peggy and Lauren. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And this topic is near and dear to my heart. So the moment they reached out to me, I jumped at it. Yeah, so let me share a little bit about my personal journey. And I do a lot of public speaking, and I'm pretty transparent that who I am today is because of my upbringing and the experience that I've had in my early years. So I was actually born in India, but I grew up in Middle East, and my dad was an aeronautical engineer. And at that time, Boeing 747s, the planes were a big, big deal. I know right now they are literally like dimes and pennies, but at that time, of course, there was a huge demand around that. And so my dad moved, he was sort of overseeing Middle East production units. And so we moved from state to state within Middle East, almost like every few months. So just to give you a perspective, I went to 13 different schools during my entire school year. Right? So that includes elementary, middle, and high school. And it was great. I mean, there was a lot of learning. I learned about culture. I learned about food, about people. And I was constantly in this mode of change. And, there's something that stuck out with me, which drives me till today, every single morning, is right around when I was in 6th grade. My neighbor and I became really good friends, and she and I, would always play together every time I would come back from school. And then within a few days, I started realizing that her older brothers, who were teenagers, 13 and 15 at that time, would go to school, but she wouldn't. And, I was initially very jealous. I was like, how come I get to do all the schoolwork and all the tests, and she just gets to hang out at home? I asked her a few times, couldn't get an answer. I asked my parents, couldn't get an answer. But later down the years, as I grew older, I realized that she was not allowed to go to school because of local community and the culture that she stayed in. And it bothered me a lot. Right? It was almost like self-inflection point where I kept asking, why were her brothers allowed to go to school and why not her? And so, later when I finished my bachelor's, I went on to do my MBA, and technology was one of my electives that I took up. I know right now tech is sort of table stakes, but at that time it was a privilege to get in a technology elective. That's where I realized the power of technology. And, I remember I had a special project where I used technology to do good in the community. I used that as a use case. And I used my friend's journey as central to what it is. So over the years, of course, I've worked for big tech companies. I love my job very much. But in tandem, I do a lot of work around tech for good. And that's where I'm a champion of technology and innovation at United Nations as well, where we are really pushing the agenda of technology in conservative thinking. And I like to call it conservative thinking because it's not really communities. It's the way, even you and I can think of a certain concept in a conservative way. And it's challenging the status quo there. So that's been the journey of my life. I will say, I am who I am today because of the experiences that I saw early on in my life, including war zones and, just coming out of school and seeing dead bodies on the ground. It was sort of normal. And it just helps me, remain grounded every single day that life has different shades and we got to accept that.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's such a powerful story to share with the audience for sure. Peggy, I'd love just to invite you to also share some of your background and how you came to be in the position that you are. You left a successful career in Wall Street before you became one of the first members of Golden Seeds. And I'm always so interested in, what the motivation was to make that kind of leap when you really had endless opportunities in front of you.
Well, thank you, Shaloo. That was really fascinating to hear your background. Maybe there's a little bit of a rooting of me in that I grew up with a divorced mother who got divorced when I was 2. My brother was 6 months old. My mother worked 12 hours a day. And so I grew up very much as a child who understood that women had to work and, and how hard it was to be the child in that situation where you don't have the resources. We had no babysitters or really, and my brother and I just had to make our way. And ultimately for me, I went to a fantastic public school. My mother went to Las Vegas, Nevada to get divorced when I was 2 and worked at the Nevada test site. So first off, I think I gained a deep appreciation for science because we were really surrounded. Nevada at the time had one of the highest per capita rates of PhDs because of the test site and the military bases there. It was a very rich area, obviously, because of gambling, and there were a lot of children, actually. So it was kind of a perfect storm for a really fantastic public school system. And I'm not sure that the education in America today would give me the same opportunity, and I think that's really very concerning because it was just being able to go to the same school as everybody else and shine in school that set my life on its course, which brought me to Wall Street at JP Morgan, and I had a career. But I also, in that career, by the time it was ending in 2003, I just knew I wasn't done, and I wasn't satisfied, but I could never really pin my finger on, what was wrong. And ultimately, when you look back, it was just your powerlessness, really. And I rose to managing director, but my generation, I was living it, but I wasn't understanding the data while I was in it. But my generation was the first really to make the assault. And I read a tweet today about Black women calling it the cement ceiling. I've been calling it the concrete ceiling. I mean, we slammed into something that was not made of glass. It was impenetrable. And when I left Wall Street 15 years ago, really about 2% of CEOs in the S&P 500 were women. and similarly low numbers on public boards. So when I left, you say, oh, I had opportunity ahead of me, but what I wanted to do was join a public board, in particular of a bank, because I was very concerned about credit, that what I'd seen in the credit markets and things that would be coming. And as we talked, Lauren, I discovered that even though I'd been a managing director on Wall Street, that I could not get on a board because I had not been considered C-suite. But I knew that there were no C-suite women in banking, maybe one. And that meant that there were no women from banking of my generation considered eligible to go on the board of a bank. And that was my moment of starting to say, what's wrong here? And starting to pay attention to what had happened to my gender, and starting to understand the role it played in really never having felt that I had been able to really rise to my full capability. And I think that's such a frustrating feeling. And I think most women in the world feel it, that we're held back by forces that are really beyond our control. It's almost like you're born into somebody else's chess game, and you just have to play from where you're seated, and it's galling. So to bring it to a close in a way, I met the woman who founded Golden Seeds and attended the first Golden Seeds meeting. I have a phone ringing in the background. Sorry about that, everybody. Hopefully it'll go away. What do you want me to do about that?
Just keep on going, it'll be fine.
Oh, no, some weird credit card scam voicemail you'll all hear. So she was founding this thing called Golden Seeds. And to make a long story short, 15 years ago, women were receiving essentially no capital in the angel and venture capital markets. They say it was 3% of angel capital, maybe 2% of venture capital. Neither of those numbers is really accurate. And there really were no women angels. And we had been working on Wall Street and had never heard of the angel market. It was a completely new term to us. So we discovered a stock market that had no women in it. Today, we understand it as the most, in my mind, the most important stock market that exists. All 5 of the largest companies in today's stock market by market cap, Apple, Google, et cetera, were all originally backed by an angel investor, and then went on to have venture capital. Something like 56% of all companies since the 1970s who have gone public originally had angel and venture capital. So today, the problem we set out to solve was changing the face of leadership. We just think the fundamental problem is not enough women in the C-suite in business and government. Just the face of leadership needs to be diverse and has to include women. So we were trying to address it in business, but we now see our lack of access, our exclusion from venture and angel capital as the cause. It's actually the reason why we're not in the C-suite and why we're not on boards, because all of that happens here in this market that we started attacking. We're very proud of having moved the angel market to be about 25% female in terms of investors. Maybe 25% of angel capital is going to women. By number of companies, that would not be dollars. But last year, only 2.2% of angel capital went to all female teams. So we still have a massive, massive problem in terms of access to capital. And that's what I work on every day.
Yeah, and if I may add, Peggy, I, of course, operate in the same space. And I love what you just said, that we have a massive problem, access to capital, but somehow in the investor landscape, right, they say there's a pipeline issue. There's not a pipeline issue. There is enough, materials on the ground, amazing solutions. This is like a systematic issue in the way we operate, right? Which is, we tend to say, well, there aren't too many female founded businesses. There are. You just got to go and look for them. And so I love what you said is, your company's focus, your seed funding focus entirely on female entrepreneurs, which is fantastic, right? That's
for one woman in the C-suite. And you're right about the pipeline. So when we started, we came out of Wall Street. So we thought it was a money problem. We thought women can't get money. That seems like something we could, and
exactly.
It's so hard that we can't believe it. Had we known, I don't know if we, it's thank God we didn't know how naive we were. But the pipeline was one of the first issues you hear, no women in tech. And I was telling Lauren about this, how we start unraveling this, because our second meeting, we had a pancreatic science company that came in. And so we were always hearing about, we were in New York, so we were always hearing these guys were saying there are no women in tech, but we were seeing PhDs all the time. In fact, my first investment that I led was 2 PhDs in applied physics. One out of Stanford, one out of Princeton in the optical fiber arena, which today is one of only 4 companies in the world that can make amorphous fluoropolymers.
Yeah.
And so eventually, what you understand is they're saying there are no women in tech. But what they really meant was in America, we have one of the lowest graduation rates of any developed nation in computer science.
Exactly.
So and our VC industry here is really, and I'm exaggerating, but is really men with computer science backgrounds.
Of course.
In computer
science. Yeah, absolutely.
And our computer science school here, not in the rest of the country. Other countries, women are well represented in computer science. Here, we are getting plenty of STEM degrees in women, but they tend to be chemistry. 50% of the STEM degrees earned by women in America are in the biological and life sciences, chemistry, engineering, deeply tech. So we have a very technological portfolio that the VCs aren't even meeting with because they don't even do this stuff. And for example, I'll tell you the boards I'm on. I'm on a board of a company we backed 12 years ago that has a phase 2 drug for Alzheimer's, Dr. Susan Catalano. And we just got a $75 million grant. I'm on the board. I'm on the board of this amorphous fluoropolymer company, PHE's completely novel technology with all kinds of applications. I'm lead investor and sit as an observer on a board of a company called Paradigm 4, co-founded by MIT computer scientist Marilyn Matz and the 2014 Turing Prize winner in computer science, Dr. Michael Stonebreaker. They can now do 1 billion linear regressions in an hour on their software that is unlocking genetic databases. I was lead investor and an observer on the board of Cadenza Innovation, which is a new paradigm for lithium-ion battery configuration. Dr. Christina Lampione-Rude, who had a $400 million VC-backed company, Boston Power, before, and has created the storage solution that will not catch fire, that we anticipate will be the first storage system to go into buildings in New York. Once we have a system safe enough to go into buildings, the whole thing can be unlocked. And this is a woman. I'm on a company called ShipperBee out of Canada. We want to undo hub and spoke delivery of packages, which is terrible for CO2. Just to give you an example, so they're always defining women as consumer products. They define us as consumers, our buying, and ladies and men who are out there. We have not shopped our way into tap power. We have not shopped our way into the C-suite, and we have not shopped our way into boards. We could, but we don't. We need to be investors, scientists, and the technology. And Golden Seeds is backing unbelievable technology, and it's being missed.
Yeah. I completely agree.
You know, some of the companies that you were mentioning there, Peggy, I think really bring us kind of to the heart of the topic for this session, in that they're touching on different aspects of the sustainable development goals that the United Nations has put in place for 2030. Shaloo, I wondered if perhaps you could give us a little bit more of the background, because you were actually part of the group that worked on the Agenda 2030, and with your work in the innovations role at the United Nations, I think that would just be a really good perspective to kind of bring into the conversation too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the SDG Sustainable Development Goals, and during the rest of the course of the conversation, I'll just use the acronym SDG. It stands for Sustainable Development Goals. The Agenda 2030 was set up in 2015. And I remember there were, of course, numerous conversations happening across campaigns, around goals, around taking action, around partnerships. But the 2030 agenda for SDG provides a global blueprint for dignity, peace, and prosperity for people and the planet now or in the future. That's sort of the bottom line for what this framework is all about. And I know it sounds very cliche when we talk about dignity, peace, and prosperity, but it is important. You know, oftentimes we get so sucked into, let's say, you know, what Peggy was just sharing about funding, that we tend to forget the basics of how we need to approach the innovation ecosystem, right? And so SDG 2030 is extremely, very closely tied to innovation. of course, a few years into the agenda, we see how society, private sector, governments are translating their shared vision into national development plans and strategies. So initially, I remember when we put together these goals, and I'll just name a few, like no poverty, zero hunger, innovation, quality education, good health and well-being, right? Initially, people were struggling with it. They were like, well, we know, no poverty is, everybody wants that. Like, who wants to see poverty? But what SDG really did was provided a framework to execute that, which means if you are working in a region, what is the framework that you use to execute against that goal? And so I'll share with you one of the projects that I'm leading right now for UN Women is going back to my friend, my school friend. It's been extremely, a topic that's been very passionate. I'm personally very passionate about, which is online education, right? Because the solution to a girl who's not allowed to go to school is bring the school to her at home. Let's challenge the status quo. Let's push the envelope. Why are we having millions and millions of girls out there go without schooling just because there's no bathroom for them in school? Like, that's not a good enough reason. And so what we are doing right now is in emerging economies, we're partnering very closely with Apple in their refurbished inventory that's outdated, loading the digital curriculum on these iPads and pushing it to developing economies. And of course, these girls need some ambassadors, some help on the ground. So we have female advocates, sort of a safe environment where one young girl can talk to another female and say, I'm struggling with this. So it's a very safe environment. It is a challenge for us, and we're working to resolve that. But the end goal is, biometric. The girl gets into the iPad, she does her schooling. We, sitting here in the US, can actually watch her performance using big data. Right? And so that is what I'm talking about, is a framework, is how do you provide quality education on the ground? And it's I'm happy to get into 5 or 6 steps that we typically use to provide this framework, but that is sort of the foundation. And, SDG goals have not only been extremely prominent and pushed on the ground. So, of course, I lead virtual teams in Syrian refugee camps, in Uganda, in Somalia, but it's also going up to the government level, where we are having conversations, even in developed economies, like what can we do to push the envelope using technology? Personally, my passion is use technology as the strongest catalyst for change, because we're just sitting on it. We are feeding multi-billion-dollar companies with technology, whereas our basic layer in our community and society does not even have access to it. And that's where me and my team come in, where we push the agenda for technology. And SDG goals, that's basically the framework. That's the bottom line around how the framework works.
I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about looking at the SDGs as a framework, and how, maybe that lens that we're looking at it has shifted in this age of COVID-19. I was very interested to see the United Nations Secretary General issuing a call to action to really kind of rethink our recovery efforts and kind of turn those into a real opportunity to do the right things for the future, and to kind of bake in achieving these goals as part of what we're doing as in terms of creating a framework for overall recovery. I'm curious if both of you, and perhaps you could start, Peggy, could share a little bit about how you're seeing women entrepreneurs successfully approach this period of disruption, which has been tremendous across all sectors, in ways that are actually creating the possibility for truly positive, transformative changes.
Thank you. Thank you, Shaloo. And, I think the SDG goals, they are huge. Sorry about this. And they seem really, you're right, you read them, you like, eliminate poverty, they're so big. What we focus on at Golden Seed, so it can be overwhelming, and I think everybody has to sort of try to focus on something that's kind of, you can take on in your own life, and you have to view it as a movement, and that every single thing that all of us do contributes to it if we have some mindfulness about it. And so what we took on, and it's interesting, is we took on women in leadership. We're saying if you just change if we just had women in leadership in business, and this would be true in government, this would be true, countries with 50% of their police forces being female or more peaceful. You just need women present at the table across the board in every sector of society. And so we work on that in business, and we don't put anything else on the companies, because we believe that if we can just give women a fair chance of getting capital allocated to them to be a great businesswoman, and we see the power of successful entrepreneurs and business people like the Gates, you see what happens with what they can do in a society with what they create. And we are saying women need that power. We need the power of the ability to allocate the capital to these issues. So we don't put anything on our companies. We just want her to build a great business. We know that women will build different kinds of companies. That said, you already heard some of my boards, some of the companies I'm in, but 30% of what Golden Seeds invests in, for example, is healthcare. We're one of the only angel groups that does it. Why did we start doing it? Well, as I mentioned, from our second meeting, a pancreatic disease-based company came in, and we quickly learned that if we were going to back the female brain in America, we had to be in life sciences, because that's where a lot of the women in STEM, that's what they're interested in, and those are they want to heal, cure, help, health. So we have a huge investment portfolio, very unusual in healthcare. Female health, you can see an ad every day about ED. Well, the female health issues is a 5 times larger market, getting almost no capital for massive issues. We have a portfolio of 4 companies already in that space. So we were already in telehealth. So one day people will understand that by listening to women entrepreneurs, because ultimately entrepreneurs solve these issues, all the trends are at Golden Seeds with very unique solutions. What about this online education? You're absolutely right. We have to find new ways to educate, and we have education companies. And we may, as I said, have the solution for renewable energy, which is safe, fire-free battery storage. That's sitting at Golden Seeds. It's the brain of a woman who actually invented it. So we're in every pillar of the SD, working on everything there. We don't require it though. We don't require a woman have that other aspect to her business, because we think that even if she just builds a great business, we have a software business in work trucks. We have a restaurant-based software company that is probably helping a lot of restaurants stay in business today and pivot to delivery models, things like that. So they all end up, I think, having really positive things to do. So innovation at times like this is massive, and we have to listen to the women too. And they have to get just as funded as men, because their ideas are as rich, and they're going to have really surprising solutions through a unique lens, and it's going to be very technological, a lot of what they're going to want to do, and a lot less consumer than people often assume. So it's just, and we're seeing fabulous stuff right now. In fact, when this all started, we created a COVID committee. We wanted to make sure that we would accelerate any investing into companies that had something. We have, several the software company I mentioned that's used, their data software is used to on biobanks, for example, is being heavily used by companies trying to do rapid vaccine development. We have a lot of companies very engaged in different aspects here. So these are times of opportunity, but they're also, it's a scary time. And I will also say this on gender, very exciting that we've proven that most white collar workers can actually work from home. It may not be the greatest experience in every level, but nobody can say it can't be done now. On the other hand, we have to be very mindful and thoughtful about how we do it, because we're already reading about companies saying, oh, we'll never go back to the office, blah, blah, blah. And Lauren, you and I talked about, and I can't give you the exact citation, but I know I've heard that, for example, men in academics are publishing more in this environment, and women academics are publishing less, which tells us who is doing all the childcare at home. And we've been hearing sort of anecdotal, there are a lot of men who want to go back to the office because they want to get away from it. And we have to be really careful as we go back into offices that it doesn't become men going back to work and women staying home. And companies have to really watch this stuff and make sure it plays out pretty equally.
Yeah, that sidelining or off-ramping phenomenon is certainly a real concern. Shaloo, before we jump into maybe that topic, I wonder if you wanted to share a bit more on your perspective on some of the disruptive innovation that you're seeing right now.
Yeah, I agree with Peggy. I think she's covered most of the things that I wanted to share, and there are a couple of things that I want to do. One is, of course, share the innovation that we are seeing out there, but also tie innovation, female founders back to the SDG goals, right? Because I think that's very crucial on how there are some activities that are happening on the ground. So let me touch on some of the innovations. I got to tell you, my daily work centers around a few aspects, and one of them is female founders. And the reason is I have seen enough, and I've heard enough narrative in the market around there is not enough innovation, there's solutions are not good enough, we see a pipeline issue. When we go in emerging economies, the technology is not up to speed. And I have been in the global role for quite a few years, right? And I've seen innovation happening in Israel, in Amsterdam, in Dubai, in India, right? All across the globe. I fail to understand where this narrative is coming from and how does it even translate in our community. And so recently, due to COVID, I've seen some fabulous business ideas coming from female founders. And I can go on and on about, like, I'll give you a very simple example. One of the female founders actually is based right here in San Francisco. She's part of our Microsoft Global Social Entrepreneurship Program, which I had launched earlier this year, purely focused on social entrepreneurs. She actually is building a solution to preempt the outbreak of cholera, which is one of the worst, deadliest diseases in the world. It's actually worse than COVID. But now she's building a testing kit for COVID. And, I know we have big pharmaceutical companies looking at testing and how that is translated. But this is pretty much a $6 testing kit. And her whole vision is making the testing accessible to even a normal layman. You go into Walgreens, you just pick the testing kit as if you were picking something else, and you're out of there. It doesn't have to be so sort of bureaucratic in terms of how you can get testing. So amazing innovation there. Every time I meet female founders and anytime they show interest towards leaning towards the SDG goals, because I strongly believe what SDG goals do is provide a framework for execution, right? It's not like a holy grail for innovation. It's just basically 17 SDG goals. It gives you parameters, it gives you framework, and then it helps you execute. That's what it is. And so my guidance to the female founders that I've given recently is 5 things. Number 1, understand the external environment. The SDG issues, the sustainable development issues that the Agenda 2030 is trying to address is impacting on the organization's ability to create value for itself and its stakeholders. So it's very important that it's not about me, but it's about my external environment. And it's very, very important to do that. In fact, recently, most of the founders that I've talked to, are building the solution, and I coach them. I said, have you thought, how your solution is how are you planning to pivot your solution a year from now, where hopefully we'll be in the post-COVID world and your solution may be redundant? Like, instead of thinking about today, think about a year from now. That's number 1. Number 2 is identify material issues that influence the value creation. It is super critical that, the materiality process for integrated reporting, which involves identifying, evaluating, prioritizing matters that are based on the ability to affect value creation. Back to the example that I gave previously, which is, if I'm building a solution for today, is it going to be valid for a year from now? And what is the value creation life cycle there? Because if there isn't any, let's come up with a plan B. Number 3 is developing a strategy. I know it sounds very cliche, but trust me, when we look at strategy pre-COVID world, COVID world, post-COVID world, 3 different beasts. Right? So develop a strategy on where you want to go. And I often help, coach female founders to say, guys, get your act in order. Because if you don't have a strategy, you're pretty much out there trying to grab whatever you can. funding from whoever you can, and very soon you're going to be running short on the runway. Fourth is, which is near and dear to my heart, is integrated thinking and connectivity. And this really ties into the process of engaging with your ecosystem network, right? So the investors, the mentors, the coaches, the incubators, accelerators, what have you, that have identified targets to be achieved. And that's what I look as what I call support system, like identify what that is. And then finally, integrated reporting. And again, this is within the framework of SDG goals, which is, you may be doing some kick-ass stuff out there, but if you're not good in reporting out, and by reporting, I don't mean give your term sheets to your investors that, hey, my investor has put in $10 million and look at what I'm doing. By reporting is all about, how you're actually moving the ball. And it's super critical that, we stick within a framework and then we execute. Now, framework, just one closing comment there. Framework doesn't mean that you're impeding your ability to innovate. You're still innovating, but you're creating structure and discipline around how you're going to market. And that's super critical.
I remember when you and I talked about your desire to always kind of bring structure to the chaos. So that really rings true to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I love that. And you put me in a black hole and say, go figure it out. I love that space.
Peggy, I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on, from a human capital perspective, what you see as needing to change in terms of the sidelining, particularly of women, but of whole groups of people in this COVID environment, and where you see either women entrepreneurs or women who are maybe leaders inside companies that perhaps they don't own, but they're still leaders nonetheless, what they could be doing from that human capital perspective to really help give everyone access to the talent force in full.
So for me, in this context of SDGs, I really try to convey to people how terrible this lack of capital is and what we're doing to our world by not allocating capital to women and their ideas. And you have to put these things in numbers. And the US our numbers are terrible on gender, on almost every measurement. And people really don't understand this. But for example, just to give you some ways of looking at it, because this is just so profound. And when you talk about all those other pillars, women should be getting equal funding to address them with the companies that they want to build. These problems cannot be solved without our brains and our ideas. And so here in the United States, for example, we have one of the lowest labor participation rates of working age women of any developed nation. It peaked in the 1990s, my generation, which is where the term off-ramping came, which is what we knew women were leaving because our generation basically work became, our country makes work and having children a choice. Evolved developed nations have very high labor participation rate of working age women in the 70%, and we're in the 50%. We have fallen to be like number 22 out of maybe 24 developed nations. That's how bad it is here. We're the only developed nation without paid mandatory family leave or maternity leave policy. And evolved countries make men take it. It's not just the woman who has to step out to do some childcare, it's also the man, because otherwise it would only be the women who do it. So S&P did a very brilliant study in my mind a few years ago that nobody ever really noticed, in my opinion, that said that costs us, if we had a normal rate of working women in this country, that we would produce something like 5 to 6% more GDP and trillions of dollars of stock market valuation. And Morgan Stanley did a similar study on people of color and their exclusion, similar, low rate of participation, exclusion from capital. And what you're really talking about is sidelining GDP and massive stock market valuation. So maybe, what is the language, for example, what's the language to get somebody to wear a mask in this country? Who knows, what is the language to get people to understand the economic burden of not capitalizing and getting, having an equal working world so that everybody is producing at their highest level. So these things play a huge toll on our economy and on just our happiness and our well-being. And women are not doing well here, and we know they're, generally, there's just so many issues across the world. But here, even as a leader, we are not a leader in gender. We're not a leader in government. We're not a leader in anything on gender. Education, we have a low rate of STEM degrees by women. I mean, you look across the board. It's not great on the data side. So that's another thing, is everyone really has to be aware of the data. And then I think you have to really focus on the toll of of sidelining people. And in this COVID environment, I already mentioned, I'm a little worried about women getting sidelined in the coming back to work. And how is that all really going to play out? And we just have to be careful. And that's why you need women at the top and on the boards to be engaged in making sure that these return to work cultures play out equally. There are all kinds of unintended consequences. These things always happen, and you have to course correct. One of my favorite yoga concepts is reflect, correct, connect, which is we always end at problem solving here. We reflect, oh, there's a problem. We correct, I moved my foot. But maybe I just threw my hip off. And I have to connect the correction into a new solution, instead of just living in a land of problem solving and unintended problems, because you don't make the connections, which is what Shaloo was talking about.
And really always being out of balance. Yeah.
Yeah, and Lauren, if I may just add something here that Peggy just mentioned, women are not just potential beneficiaries of efforts to achieve SDG by 2030. They're also active participants in achieving it. And so it is very critical to understand that. That's why this whole SDG notion is is basically there to highlight the efforts of women entrepreneurs to create jobs and help reach the goals. Let's not look at female entrepreneurs as, business leaders, CEO founders. They're actually creating jobs. They're moving the needle on GDP, which, people oftentimes forget about it. Like, imagine a 10-employee startup is hiring, like, even if there's one founder, she's hiring 9 more people. That's creating jobs. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is the 2030 agenda cannot be realized without the participation of women, particularly those working in private sector. That's the sector that we sit in, right? Mm-hmm. Indeed, if women had the same lifetime earning as men, there was a figure that I read by World Bank that the global wealth increase would go up by $160 trillion, which is roughly an average of about 23,000 something, 600 something per person, in 140 or 41 countries worldwide. So female entrepreneurship is on the rise globally. Let's fuel that. Let's put some gas on the fire there. Let's encourage that. And women-owned businesses are making tremendous strides in sectors like healthcare. Peggy just talked about it. Digital technology, agriculture, transportation, clear energy, water, education. I mean, they're all over there. It's just what we need to do is put some gas on the fire and let these entrepreneurs blossom. And that's what we need to do.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the capital issue and pipeline and how much pipeline potential is out there. Peggy, when you and I spoke earlier this week, you shared with me this incredible statistic that I think correct me if I've got the numbers wrong, but if we had venture capital funding for all of the worthy, innovative business opportunities that women entrepreneurs have created, we'd need another $50 to $70 billion in venture capital funding annually, which just kind of blows my mind that the numbers are that high.
I think that the unfunded opportunity is that enormous, and that's not even a global number. So last year, it used to be that the angel, when we started 15 years ago, angel and venture capital were almost equal. There was one year where angel was almost as big as venture. They were both like $25, $30 billion markets. Well, now in the era of unicorns and all of this, the VC market was 120 billion last year, and angel capital, I think, was still 25, 30 billion, something like that. But as I mentioned, women only got 1.8 billion, 2.2% of the 120 billion of venture capital. So, and the average check to these few women who got it is an average of 5 million, whereas a man gets 10. They get twice the capital. So women, well, even if they get funded, they're constantly looking for money. They're worn out by the search for capital. So what I'm saying though is that the things they're working on are so big, and they're not even being seen. So we need a map. It's not about taking some of the 120 and switching it over, because this is sideline GDP. So I personally think we could use another 50 billion in capital just to fund women, or we have to get really, really big in our thinking here and say that no venture money can ever go to an all-male team. Last year, 85% of all venture capital went to all-male teams, not a single woman. Maybe we just say, sorry, boys, you better have a woman or, some kind of diverse person in that founding C-suite to be eligible for this kind of funding.
Shaloo, I wondered if you could, one of the things you and I talked about was kind of this, it's not really a flipped side, but another aspect of the pipeline and capital access question. And that's that you really see also a lack of access to mentors.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could talk about that a bit more as well, because I think that's another area where folks who are watching this conversation may feel like they can plug in and help to affect some change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, of course, access to capital is a pivotal issue, right, that we're looking to address. But I guess we are too hung up on that. There are bigger issues that are out there, like access to coaches and mentors. There's imposter syndrome, right? There are enough research studies out there. In fact, I think last year, TechCrunch released a report, and PitchBook as well, where imposter syndrome was identified as one of the issues that women face, right? Coaches and mentors. I know growing up, and I'm not an entrepreneur, it's my dream, so please wish me luck there. But growing up, I was always, now when I am today, I look back at my life and I say, gosh, I wish I had a mentor, like somebody who I could talk to. Maybe I could have done things differently. And so I do believe that coaching and mentoring is so important. And don't make your investor your coach. Right? Go out, talk to other female entrepreneurs, talk to, struggling entrepreneurs, talk to the established ones, and just get insight, just listen. You don't have to act on it. You just need to soak it in and then make the decision that's right for you. And so I think that's a topic that we need to focus on. And, the way I say it is, yes, capital is important, but so is support infrastructure, right? So if I give you $1 million funding and I say, Lauren, go have a party. Peggy, $2 million for you. Go have fun, right? At the end of the day, you would need coaching and mentoring. You would need sales acceleration to sustain the runway on the capital investment. And that's where the needle moves, is how do you keep that ball rolling? And that's through building that network of influence around you.
Peggy, what are some of the pieces of advice that you would give to someone who's looking to bring more mentors into their business?
Well, I totally agree. I mean, you need both. And this was so as I said, when we came into this, we thought it was a capital issue, but we quickly learned it's a network issue. But it's really both, because women have been expanding their networks, but the capital's still not there. So I totally agree, Shaloo. I mean, we have to be working on it from both ends. I think that we are, but I do think the capital's really important, because also a lot of times these networks cost money. Sometimes it's paid advice or paid in stock, things like that. So it doesn't hurt to have some capital to improve the kind of mentoring that you might get. But,
yeah. Sorry, Peggy. But I think, the onus lies on folks like you, me, Lauren, and many other women there, right? We have the bruises in the industry. We've seen success, we've tasted failure, and it's also about giving back. And I'm sure as part of your job, you're constantly meeting female founders who are asking you, Peggy, how can I do better? What can I do? In a way, you are coaching them. You may not invest in them, right? But you're still coaching them. And you may say, you need to do this, or you may want to think about this in a different way. And the onus lies on female leaders like us to give back to the community. And that's something that, just we need to train our brain muscle to keep doing that. And more come up, the more and more female founders will be successful there.
And one thing we've always tried to do, by the way, and I'm glad you brought this up, is we always try to give feedback.
Yeah.
So if you have something, and people need honest advice, it's their job to, so give feedback. Don't just, don't return, listen to the pitch, and if you don't like it, just kind of disappear. Tell them what you thought. They might get something helpful from that. So really giving feedback is really amazing. I read about a professor one time. I thought about seeing if I could do it myself, but I wasn't. But it's a person who practices it's very radical, but he will, anyone who emails him, anyone who calls him and asks him a question, he'll answer it 100%.
Wow.
As his way of giving back. But I already get so much of that, those kinds of, I just couldn't imagine. But I have, ever since I read that, I do try to be as responsive as I can to as many things as I can. I think just trying to do as much as you can is valuable.
We've covered so many different aspects of this topic here in our time together. And just as we close out, I wonder if we could take some time to think through. I feel like sometimes in these conversations, it's easy to just become overwhelmed by the depth and breadth of the topic at hand and the issues that are around us and the challenges that we're all facing. Can we hone in on maybe one or two real specific things that someone who's been listening to this conversation around advancing the SDGs or is interested in, really trying to help women entrepreneurs affect positive change as they go through this COVID pivot? What's one or two things that you would like to see people take what we've been talking about today and go do?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, my advice would be, don't take no for an answer sitting down, right? So if you have an idea, it's almost like you have a baby. And no matter how ugly the baby is, it's still your baby, right? So you own the baby. And the baby may not be born perfect. It's okay. Groom the baby, nurture the baby, feed the baby, and make it the most awesome looking adult in the market. So no matter who comes to you and says, gosh, what are you doing? Like, this was like 5 years ago, and why are you wasting your time? No. As long as you have done your due diligence, you have done your homework well, stick to it. And I see, you have no idea. It's so disheartening to see so many female founders just take no easily. And please, please don't do that. Don't give up on yourself. That's number one. Number two is, as I mentioned earlier, train your brain muscle to pay it forward. Just train it. Every morning we get up, we brush our teeth, we go for a run, whatever we do, we have a cup of coffee. Just like that, just penetrate giving back to others as part of your lifestyle. Trust me, there's so much goodness. It's not just giving back, it's also learning. And I know personally, I learn quite a bit from anyone, not only female founders, but anyone I give back to. There's so much learning there. So those are two things. Don't take no for an answer, and always give back.
That's great. Thank you so much. Peggy, how about you?
So I think, Shaloo, you're speaking to entrepreneurs. I don't know if the audience is more general, so first off, I agree totally. So do what Shaloo told you to do. And I would say listen to Shaloo just really across the board. I really like what she's been saying. I was thinking more in terms of a more general audience, perhaps, or aspiring, but I think first off, pay attention to data, because when you start understanding things in terms of data, it takes the emotion out of conversations. And so, Lauren and I talked about this years ago, when we started saying we were funding women, there were actually people who would be a little hostile with us, and you'd be like, but when you say, but only they don't get 2% of capital went to them, it's kind of hard to say that's not a problem. So know your numbers, and then just find, if you're non-entrepreneur, but just find that something, because think of it as a movement, everything contributing to a better world, because that's what the SDG is about. Why? None of us want to live in a world with this kind of climate change, with these levels of poverty, with the kind of suffering that's going on. How did we get here with all of this great tech that Shaloo's talking about? All of this, how is it that so many people have been left behind? This is not what any of us want. So the question is, what do we each do? So, it could be as simple as make sure you vote. If it could be, depending, if you're in a corporation, is pay equal? Are there women on the board? Just look for something, and there's always something you can do. And don't get into despair. Just get up every day and do your best, because that's all any of us can do. And we have a lot to get done. We have a lot to get done together. And we just, find your spot, find little things, find big things. Everybody can have an impact here.
That's so true. I think you hit the nail on the head right there. It's such a great way to close this out, that we have so much to do and to do it together. And I think if each person takes their role in this, then ultimately we'll lift everything up. So I just want to thank you both again. It's been an absolute delight to spend time with you, and I appreciate how generous you've both been with the information that you've shared and the time and attention that you've brought to the conversation today. So thank you to Peggy and to Shaloo. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this session. And again, we encourage you to keep the conversation going. That's how change happens, is through dialogue and through conversations like this one. So make sure that you're having those reach out to everyone using the social media hashtags there. And of course, also share your favorite moments from the session. There's a digital media wall for the World Women Future Forum 2020. So please go check that out and share your favorite aspects from our conversation today. So with that, we'll close out and say goodbye to everybody. Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Shaloo. Appreciate you.